Welcome everybody to the afternoon session of Lane County Board of Commissioners meeting. We will start out with item 13A. This is public hearing and order number 20-12-01-07 in the matter of annexing territory to the Goshen Rural Fire Protection District to provide fire protection service to the annexation territory, consisting of a 3.45 acre parcel identified as Assessor's Map 18-03-16-10, tax lot 2600. And I will recognize Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to say that I really appreciate Mr. Bowder's email to me saying that Land Watch and Sean Malone are not involved in the fire district annexation application set for 1:30 today. And so I don't have any conflict on this matter. And thanks to Mr. Bowder for bringing it to my attention. Thank you.
Okay, very good. So I'm going to explain the rules and purposes of the hearing. This is a public hearing on the matter, giving an opportunity for those to present to enter information into the record. And if the board approves the proposal, they can adopt a final order on the annexation, or the decision criteria for special district annexations are established in the Lane County Board Order 07-12-12-19 and are cited in the agenda cover memo and attachment. Right now, I will call for a disclosure of board member ex parte contacts and for any abstentions due to conflicts of interest, ex parte contacts, or biases.
I have none.
Okay. Commissioner Sorensen?
I have none. Thank you.
Okay. Then I will, yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt. This is Diana. We have no camera footage on any commissioners right now. It looks like all of your cameras are muted.
We see everybody.
Okay, I will try to work on it on this end. If I was just going to have everyone unmute their cameras if you had them, because they all show muted on my end and on the video on the Metro's end. But I'll see if I can fix it on the back end. Thanks.
Okay, can you hear us?
Yes, we can hear you. We can see the agenda. We just can see no cameras.
Oh, interesting. I think we're all seeing each other though. We'll continue as long as you say you have audio for recording. All right, I'm going to call for any challenges to hearing authorities' qualifications to hear the matter. No challenges. All right. We'll open the public hearing. So now we will hear a report from staff.
Good afternoon, Chair Buck and Commissioners. This is Jared Bowder, staff planner for this application. The request before you today is an annexation into a special district boundary, specifically a fire district. These types of requests are subject to ORS Chapter 198, as well as a Lane County Board Order number 7/12/12/19 from the year 2007. It provides guidance for processing applications related to special district boundaries. This is the only public hearing scheduled on this matter pursuant to ORS Chapter 198. The application before you today is for the annexation of one parcel, approximately 3.45 acres, into the Goshen Rural Fire Protection District. The parcels are located southwest of Lane Community College near East 43rd Avenue, just outside the urban growth boundary of Eugene, and is accessed off of Spring Boulevard. The subject property is directly adjacent to the west of the group of 17 properties the board authorized to annex into the Goshen Rural Fire Protection District on August 25th of 2020 via order number 20-08-25-03. The Goshen Fire District Board of Directors approved the request to annex the properties with resolution number 5-20 on July 14th, 2020. Notice was posted and published as required, and as of today, no comments regarding the proposal have been received. In the agenda cover memo provided to the board, staff has evaluated the approval criteria of ORS 198, and all the approval criteria are met. If the board approves the annexation request today, then the board can move to adopt the final order. And so staff recommends that the board approves the order annexing tax lot 2600 into the Goshen Rural Fire Protection District. And thank you. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you. All right, we will go to applicant or public testimony. Is there an applicant who's interested in giving testimony at this time? Diana, do you have anybody who's raising a virtual hand? Can you tell?
And I do have a lot of people signed up. If you have called in for this meeting and would like to give public comment on this matter on the annexing territory to the Goshen Rural Fire Protection District, please raise your hand and I will call upon you for public comment. I do not have any hands raising at this time. Chair Buck, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask for any of these one last time, just in case. So any applicant's testimony, any testimony of folks in favor, any other testimony, anybody of any kind interested in this particular item on our agenda today? Okay, I'm not seeing or hearing anybody. So if there's no additional comments by staff, I'll close the hearing. And yes, Commissioner Sorensen.
I move approval of the order as presented.
Second.
Okay. Moved by Commissioner Sorensen, second by Commissioner Farr. Any discussion? Not seeing or hearing any, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed? Oh, got everybody. All those opposed say nay. Okay, motion passes unanimously. That's why I do that. Even though I think I hear everybody, I'm not quite sure if I do sometimes on this particular virtual platform. Okay. So we have completed that item. We will go to item 13B, which is the fifth reading and public hearing for ordinance number 20-08 in the matter of amending Lane Code 16.244 floodplain combining zone rural comprehensive plan, Lane Code 10.271 floodplain combining district for lands within the urban growth boundaries, and to modernize terminology and formatting, clarifying the review process. And align the code more closely with state law and the Code of Federal Regulations, Title 44, and adopting a savings and severability clause. File number 509-PA20-05047 and order 20-08-18-13 in the matter of amending Chapter 11 of the Lane Manual to remove Section 11.020 flood hazard studies. And with us, I know we have Rachel Sursleb, but I'm going to explain the rules and the purpose of this hearing, and then we'll hear from staff. So this is a continued public hearing. The date today is December 1st, 2020. The proposed Lane Code amendments are subject to the applicable criteria identified in Lane Code 12.005, 12.050, and 16.252 subsection 2, and applicable statewide planning goals. The order of proceedings for this hearing will first be the report by staff, followed by public testimony, and then additional comments by staff. Failure to raise an issue with sufficient specificity to enable a response may preclude appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals on that issue. Prior to the conclusion of the public hearing, any participant may request that the record be left open to provide an opportunity to present additional written evidence or arguments regarding the application. The board's decision may be appealed to the Land Use Board of Appeals in accordance with ORS Chapter 197. So right now I'll call for any commissioner abstentions due to conflicts of interest or bias. Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you. I believe in previous times we've had this item up before us. I've asked staff if there was comments by either Land Watch, Lane County, or Sean Malone representing Land Watch, or Sean Malone representing as an attorney representing someone else. I believe that he has submitted some comments at some point in this voluminous record. I have never discussed it with him. I do have a small amount of business remaining with him, and I just wanted to declare this potential conflict. I have received a opinion from the Oregon Government Ethics Commission stating that it's not an Oregon Government Ethics Commission conflict, but Mr. Dingle suggested out of abundance of caution that for purposes of land use, I should mention it whenever this arises. So I'm just mentioning it at this time.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right, Commissioner Farr.
Chair, but since this ordinance does affect so much, it's such a broad sweeping ordinance, I should say that many of the properties that may be affected by this, I have visited and spent time adjacent to.
Same here. Anybody else? Commissioner Burney.
Well, based on why Commissioner Farr made that statement, allow me for the first time to make a similar statement. I have no doubt visited parcels and properties that this would impact. Thank you.
Very good. All right, I'll move to calling for any challenges to the board's qualifications to hear the matter. Are there any challenges? All right, hearing none. Now we'll hear a report from staff.
Thank you, Chair Buck, and good afternoon, Commissioners. Again, this is Rachel Surslev, Staff Planner for the Floodplain Code Modernization Project. And today, staff is before you for the 5th reading and continued public hearing for the Floodplain Code amendments. We were last before you on November 10th, where the board motioned for staff to make several revisions to the Floodplain Code. Just to recap that motion, specifically the motion included direction to revise the floodway replacement dwelling language and floodplain regulations to incorporate a higher ground provision, and also to prohibit new subdivisions in the floodplain, similar to provisions contained in the Deschutes County Floodplain Code. The board also motioned to revise the definitions of critical facilities and hazardous materials to be more clear and objective, allow a no-rise analysis in lieu of meeting the compensatory storage for fill criteria, and lastly, to provide an exception to the additional freeboard requirement for structures destroyed and being rebuilt as a result of the Holiday Farm fire. These 6 revisions were made to the proposed code. They're discussed in detail in the agenda cover memo that's been provided to you. A few points that I want to make on those motions are that in regards to revising the critical facilities and the hazardous materials definitions, I just want to give a little bit of background on how we got to those changes. The critical facilities definition is now an explicit list of facilities and does not include, and it does include facilities that produce, store, or use hazardous materials. And the hazardous materials definition was revised and we think simplified by referencing the Oregon Structural Specialty Code and the Oregon Fire Code, which are already codes that the building department has that regulates buildings that contain certain types and certain amounts of materials that are considered hazardous. So it made most sense for staff to reference this already existing threshold for hazardous material instead of defining new amounts of hazardous material within the floodplain code itself. And I also wanted to discuss the exception to the freeboard requirement for structures destroyed by the Holiday Farm fire. To address this exception, staff is proposing to delay the effective date of the higher freeboard standard to 2023. And this would delay the higher freeboard standard for all development in the county and not just the area affected by the Holiday Farm fire. But it would have the effect of allowing those people who are rebuilding after the fire to be subject to the currently effective 1 foot above base flood elevation freeboard that's currently in place. And staff found that this is the best way to address this issue because there could be confusion or difficulty drafting a code that outlines a specific freeboard standard for a certain area of the county, while the rest of the county may be held to a different standard. And since the publishing of the agenda cover memo, staff has received comments that are in support of the revisions that have been made to the code. And we've also received comments from Wildish Sand and Gravel, which have been provided to you as part of the agenda cover memo materials. And I also received one other comment just prior to this hearing, and I'll be providing that to you before the next reading of the ordinance. And lastly, the agenda cover memo identifies December 15th as a possible date for the next reading of this ordinance. But the next available meeting date is actually going to be January 5th. So if the board motions to move this ordinance forward today, we'd request that the 6th reading be set for January 5th instead of December 15th. And that concludes my staff report for now. Thank you, Chair Buck.
Very good. Thank you. So at this point, we will hear public testimony, but I need to pause for one moment because we are having some issue with Metro is unable to record our videos at the moment. They can hear our audio and they can see the agenda, but they can't see us. So Diana, if you're on, yes, if you could explain.
I would propose, if we can, since we have all the people here for public comment and they won't be on camera anyway, that if we could move through public comment and then we will disconnect this and relink in and see if our cameras come back in after that. Would that work?
Sure, we can do public testimony first.
That way that all of the people who've called in for public testimony will not need to call back in when the meeting closes down for a second.
I'm sure they all want to hear our responses too. Commissioner Burney, did you have something?
That was exactly the point I was going to make.
They can hear the responses without calling in. They can just watch, but I'm open to doing whatever. We just might have to take about a 5-minute break to get everyone back on.
Okay, well, let's, continue with public testimony because people are waiting, and then we can take a 5-minute break and we can all log back in to go through the final steps.
And to any of the attendees, you should be able to come back in also and listen, or you can just watch the webcast, however you would prefer to do it. So would you like me to move to public comment?
Just one moment, Commissioner Sorensen.
I just wanted to ask a question, Chair. So we're going to hear the public comment, and then what are we going to do after we hear the public comment?
We're going to pause for a short recess, about 5 minutes, and I'll log back in so that Metro can record the remaining portion of our afternoon meeting.
Do we log back in on the same thing that we did to get to this point?
Yes, I'm gonna shut the meeting down and I'll restart it and you'll come back in.
Okay, so are you going to send another email out to us, or do we use the same one that we used to get onto this one?
I'm hoping you can use the same one that you get in on this one, but we'll have to see what happens.
Very good. Thank you so much for the clarification.
And if you can't, I will send a new link to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, let's move to public testimony. So we usually, depending on how many people are in testimony, we have in the past given sometimes 5 minutes per response, 3 to 5 minutes. Let's see how many folks are interested to ensure we have enough time for everybody. So if you are interested, raise your virtual hand, and I'm going to move this over to Diana, our moderator.
Thank you, Chair Buck. I do see quite a few hands going up. I see about 9 or 10 hands up right now. I have 13 total attendees. So do you want me to move ahead with the 3-minute timer? Chair Buck?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
Okay, I will use the 3-minute timer. At this time, I will call upon our first person, who will be Kelly Wood. Kelly, I will unmute you and begin your public testimony. Following Kelly will be Tom Bowerman.
Good afternoon.
You may begin your public.
Good afternoon. My name is Kelly Wood, and I'm here representing Wildish Sand and Gravel. I did submit the written comments on November 24th, which will provide more detail on the specific concerns. As you know, I've presented on a number of occasions, and while we feel that progress has been made, there are still several items of concern. To say that the proposed code is complex is really an understatement. As an example, at the last hearing, there was an amendment to the motion specifically to exempt victims of the holiday fire from the requirement to elevate replacement structures to the new 2-foot standard. The proposal did not, however, include an exemption for the proposed compensatory storage requirement or from having to submit a certificate of no rise. The proposed codes are entwined in such a way that when you add them all together, there really is no doubt that it will lead to lengthy delays and in many cases may make development cost prohibitive. Another item of concern is, of course, the compensatory storage altogether. We continue to maintain that this code should not be included at this time. We feel strongly that it's going to cause more problems than it actually solves. Even just looking at some of the language that requires maintaining the storage capacity may be impossible if you actually, when it says that future development of the excavation area is prohibited, but then the definition of development includes excavation. So if you can't clean out the storage, you can't maintain capacity. There's just some issues with the way it's written, and we feel strongly that it should not move forward. We appreciate the efforts to clarify the definition of hazardous materials, although I can honestly say that I spent about 2 hours going through the Oregon Fire Code and the Oregon Structural Specialty Code in an attempt to look up what that might mean for us, and it is not much more clear to us. And we feel strongly that going back to the recommendation that was submitted by Michael Gilardi, he submitted a recommendation for the definition of critical facilities. And we feel strongly that that would clarify and, help with the definition. So we appreciate you guys taking the time and to consider all of these things. And yes, thank you very much.
Thank you for your public comments. I will reset the timer and I will call upon Tom Bowerman next. Following Tom Bowerman will be Chad Sagasser. I apologize if I destroyed your last name there. Mr. Bowerman, I will unmute your microphone and I will begin you can begin your public comment.
Thank you. I lost my place by coming back over here. I have a testimonial. My name is Tom Bowerman. I live at 33707 Mackenzie Drive, have for a little more than 70 years. I want to compliment you, the board, Chair Buck, and your staff and Board of Commissioners generally for diligence to reach this fifth reading, and I feel it is ready for adoption. In deliberation, I urge you to keep the big picture of public safety in mind. To those who believe that we don't face sufficient flood risk to improve our standards, I quote the National Flood Insurance Program Study Guide for Local Officials. In other words, speaking to you, which says, quote, flooding may not occur often enough in your area to be viewed as a problem in need of a solution. This may make it difficult to obtain the public and political support necessary to carry out local floodplain management measures designed solely to reduce future flood losses. One approach is to tie the need to manage the floodplain to protect your community's economic well-being with the need to protect and maintain natural resources and functions in the floodplain. These resources and functions may be of considerable benefit to the community, a benefit often not realized or underestimated. And to the point raised by those who advocate for meeting only the minimum standards, I quote the U.S. Federal Code on Flood Hazard Regulations in the Federal Register, which sets the guidelines for FEMA. Quote, the criteria set forth in this subpart are minimum standards for the adoption of the floodplain management regulations. Therefore, any floodplain management regulations adopted by a state or a community which are more restrictive than the criteria set forth in this part are encouraged and shall take precedence. And from Unit 6 of the NFIP regulations, they quote, the NFIP encourages states and communities to implement floodplain management programs that go beyond NFIP minimum requirements. And there is more repeated in numbers of areas which are encouraging higher standards than the minimum. I believe that this fifth reading draft strikes a good balance on meeting broad community goals along the federal constitutional rulings on judicial takings concerning health and safety measures. I appreciate your diligence on this, and I'm ready to see it go forward. And thank you very much. I'm done.
Thank you for your public comment. Our next speaker will be Chad Sagasser, followed by Christian Beck. Chad, I will reset the timer. I will unmute your microphone and you may begin your public comment. Chad, I do show you are self-muted. There you go.
Is that better? Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me. I just want to say my name's Chad Sagasser. I live at 48459 West Oak Road in Oak Ridge, Oregon. I've lived in the Willamette Valley for 30 plus years, and on numerous occasions outside of the 100-year flood plan experiences between 1996, 2001, and another years have seen substantial impacts on friends living in floodways where either emergency services have been paved with possibly put it compromised or questioning where driveways are at or things of that sort. I think it's something definitely to be seriously considered regarding hazardous waste issues going down rivers, and the 100-year flood thing seems to be kind of out of the window, seeing more and more rising waters as such, and just more impacts regarding rivers moving and such of that things. It's something I've seen personally, and it just seems to be something to be a good thing to chime in regarding what's happening out in the public world. And that's the end of my statement.
I apologize. Thank you. Our next presenter will be Christian Beck, followed by Jason Namer. Let me reset the timer, and I will unmute your microphone, Christian. Christian, I do show you are self-muted.
Yep.
There you go.
Okay, thank you. Hello, my name is Christian Beck. I'm a longtime Lane County resident and river user. Spend a lot of time on local rivers, largely the Willamette and the McKenzie. I'm an avid fly fisherman, and really appreciate the fact that we have these urban rivers flowing through our town, and they are a great resource to all the residents here in the local community. Over the years, I've seen the impact of development on these local rivers. And as urban rivers, they face a lot of extra challenges that rural rivers do not experience, and everything from residential to commercial development along the waterways and their riparian zones. So I think anything we can do to help preserve these rivers for the public, for fly fishermen, for rafters, for swimmers, for picnickers, for anybody that likes to get out and experience a little nature in the urban environment. Anything we can do to preserve those for the future, I think is we only have one opportunity to do that. And having been on the river as much as I have and seeing it from the center of the river looking out, you can definitely see the impact of development along the waterways, the shores of the river, the flood paths. And during this extended period of time, 20 to 30 years on these rivers, I've seen several occasions where properties have been allowed to be developed in what I would consider to be unsafe areas. And oftentimes in the beginning of construction, you can see it happening, and you scratch your head and you wonder why didn't somebody raise a flag to this in the beginning? So I think this is an opportunity to identify these issues and just clarify what's been done or what is being done. I think Lane County as a whole does a really good job of addressing these things and managing land use. So I would like to see this extend into our sensitive waterways. So I appreciate your time in considering this.
Thank you for your public comment. Let me reset the timer. Our next speaker will be Jason Namer, followed by Josh Laughlin. Jason, I will unmute your microphone and you may begin your public comment. You appear to be self-muted right now.
All right, am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
All right, excellent. My name is Jason Niemer. I'm from Oak Ridge, Oregon, 47849 West 2nd Street. And I too have been living in Oregon in general, mostly the Willamette Valley for the last 20 plus years. And kind of just gonna ducktail on a lot of what has just been said by Tom, Chad, and Christian, that I've experienced a lot of things out here. The 1996 flood was one of them that really opened my eyes to what could potentially be in terms of disaster here. And seeing I was part of the Habitat for Humanity cleanup project where we went in and shoveled out people's basements and just saw the devastation. It was pretty horrific. And so I'm in support of this ordinance. And the 100-year flood, as it were named, is not necessarily the 100-year flood anymore. It seems to be every 5 years or so. So we're going to see more of this, especially with climate change. But one thing I do want to stress as well, and I know this is covered within the ordinance, is a lot of the holiday farm fire victims and such are grandfathered in, and that should be something that is very important. They need to rebuild, and I totally understand that in a safe way. And I'm pretty much just speaking on the behalf of new structures that are planned. So, and that's about all I have to say on that. I'm just in support of the ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment. Let me get to the next person. Let me reset the timer. Our next speaker will be Josh Laughlin, followed by Lily Bowerman. Josh, I will reset the timer and unmute your microphone, and you may begin your public comment.
Lily Bowerman. Lily's
Can you hear me okay?
Really? Yeah.
Right now it would be Josh.
This is Josh. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. Chair Buck and Lane County Board of Commissioners, my name's Josh Laughlin. I'm a 27-year resident of Eugene and the Executive Director of Cascadia Wildlands, testifying today on behalf of our 12,000 members and supporters, many of which reside here in Lane County. I appreciate the opportunity to comment today on Lane County's revisions to the Floodplain Development Code, as this is an issue of paramount interest to us and our membership. We last submitted public comment on this topic on September 1st, 2020, and appreciate the progress made by the board and staff since then. In preparing remarks and comments, I'm reminded of an old adage that a river is only as healthy as its adjacent wildlands. And it's clear to me, particularly when you float down them, that our county's river systems have suffered for too long from overdevelopment. Decades of streamside degradation have severely impacted habitat for both terrestrial and aquatic species, reduced water quality, and exacerbated flooding. I own a raft and I see this firsthand as I float downstream, and it's getting worse as our population increases. We have in front of us today a forward-thinking opportunity to arrest this negative trend and enhance the health of our iconic waterways in the county, including the Willamette and the Mackenzie and their outstanding tributaries for decades to come. And we also see it as an investment in the security of our municipal water source, the Mackenzie River, the lifeblood of our region, which provides life-sustaining drinking water to approximately 200,000 downstream residents. Cascadia Wildlands today encourages the Lane County Board of Commissioners to adopt the 5th reading to the floodplain code revision. We also recommend establishing a Lane County floodway and floodplain enforcement team to meaningfully enforce the code revision that includes significant fines for violating floodway safeguards. We've long found that safeguards don't work if they aren't enforced. Thank you for your leadership on this issue today. This kind of foresight is something that generations to come in Lane County will be thankful for.
Thank you for your public comment. Our next speaker will be Lily Bowerman, followed by Mark Shepard. I will reset the timer and unmute your microphone, Ms. Bowerman, and you may start your public comment. I do show you are, there you go.
Hi, my name is Lily Bowerman. I'm 10 years old. I've been hearing my dad talk a lot about building houses in places that can flood. I think this is a bad idea. First, it's dangerous for people to be in floods. It could hurt people that live there, and it could hurt people trying to rescue them. Second, it could hurt animals that live in the river if the house pollutes the river. Last, I think my voice is important because I'm younger than most of you. I will have to live with the effects of our choices longer. Thank you for helping the river and keeping people safe.
Thank you for your public comment. Our next speaker is Mark Shepard, followed by Mackenzie Bowerman. Mark, I will unmute your microphone and you may begin your public testimony. You are self-muted. There you go.
All right, good afternoon. My name is Mark Shepard. I'm a longtime Lane County resident, and I recently became aware that new development is currently permitted in the floodways here, and frankly, it sounds baffling, a bit crazy to me, and I think it should be prohibited. It seems clear it should have been in the county code already for the protection of riparian areas, homeowners, and rescue workers, and et cetera, in the event of a major flood. And having said that, I support the 5th reading and support the board approving the 5th reading of the ordinance 2008. Thanks very much for the time, and thanks for all the work you guys do.
Thank you for your public comment. Our next speaker is Mackenzie Bowerman. Mackenzie is the last person I show signed up for public comment. If you did join our meeting and you would like to give public comment, please raise your hand and I will call upon you following Mackenzie Bowerman's testimony. Please make sure you only push the hand button once because it toggles off and on when you raise it. Mackenzie, I will reset the timer. I will unmute your microphone and you may begin your comment.
Thank you. Good afternoon, commissioners. Mackenzie Bowerman, 532 Olive Street in Eugene. I have reviewed the language contained within the 5th reading of Ordinance 20-08, and I support its effect. The 5th reading is the result of a robust public process involving input from many stakeholders. Consideration has been given to affected landowners, the aggregate mining industry, public utilities, the interests of public safety, conservation of natural resources, state and federal agencies, those impacted by the Holiday Farm fire, and many interested and concerned citizens. The crafting of law can be a delicate process, balancing interests, pairing the rights of individuals with the good of the whole. In this process, I have consulted with authorities in the fields of land use, hydrology, public safety, and ecology. I have studied floodplain codes from other jurisdictions, looking for the best examples. This is with the goal of helping get it right. I support the inclusion of language drawn from Deschutes County Code, specifically prohibiting new subdivisions that would create the potential for new dwellings in the floodplain, and provisions for building on higher ground when possible. I want to appreciate Lane County staff for being helpful, accessible to answer questions, and provide information in this process. I want to appreciate the Board of Commissioners for taking the time to understand these complicated issues, working to make a new floodplain code that balances the interests. Specifically, I appreciate Commissioner Bozovich's technical contributions from an engineering background and his support for clear and objective standards. I also want to appreciate Chair Buck's facilitation of this public process, keeping the ordinance moving and making sure all the voices are heard. Thank you for your efforts serving Lane County and improving our floodplain code.
Thank you for your public comment. I did show Robert Emmons had put his hand up. Robert, if you would like to give public comment, will you please re-raise your hand so I can know to call upon you? Okay, nope, I still don't see it. Robert, I'm going to unmute your microphone and let you tell us if you want to give public testimony. Your microphone is unmuted, Mr. Emmons. Would you like to give public comment?
Yes, I would. I don't know why that wasn't coming through, but hope I am now.
Yeah, your hand popped up and then it wouldn't come back up. So you may begin your public comment.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Robert Emmons, 40093 Little Fall Creek Road, Fall Creek. Speaking for myself and for Land Watch Lane County, we, like so many of the other speakers you've just heard, support the proposed amendments that you before you today, but take exception to keeping the freeboard flood elevation for replacement dwellings at 1 foot for a 3-year period. At the last hearing, Commissioner Bozovich claimed that adding another foot to foundations in the floodplain would add another $5,000 to $10,000 to construction costs, and that would unfairly and unnecessarily burden those seeking to rebuild their homes in flood areas. On the 12-mile raft trip from Fenrock to Leeburg, I took 1 week before the fire. Most, if not all, the properties we passed on both sides of the river would, I think, approach and some likely exceed $1 million in value. It's reasonable to assume that most, if not all, were insured. In that light, adding another $5,000 to $10,000 in foundation costs would not appear to constitute an unjust and insupportable burden. A broader and more environmentally responsible perspective would recognize that dwellings replaced in the floodplain will again impede and degrade the natural function of the river and its watershed with obstructive structure and the destructive practices of its owners. Moreover, with global warming and increasing flood events, it's not unreasonable to expect that the level of a 500-year flood will be reached at more frequent intervals. Because of the increasing risk to health and safety of the watersheds and its inhabitants, we urge the board to require replacement dwellings in the floodplain to be at least 2 feet above the base flood elevation now, not 3 possibly flooding and costly years later. That said, we're grateful, as so many of the other speakers have already said, for the gains in floodplain protection this arduous process has wrought, and hope that it will lead to more, and this is my abiding hope for whatever happens in the future here, that it will lead to more comprehensive legislation, including a revised riparian ordinance that addresses the ecology of watersheds as a whole. That echoes a lot of what earlier speaker, Josh Laughlin, was saying about looking at this in a much broader perspective that includes the uplands as well as the lowland areas. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your public comment. If anyone else would like to give public comment, please raise your hand now. Chair Buck, I believe that concludes our public comment for the day.
Thank you. So at this point, we're going to recess for about 5 minutes. So we'll try to get back here at 2:20 so that we can reset the cameras for Metro. So right now,
if I can add one comment while we were doing public comments, I was verifying if I could use the same link and I cannot. So when I close, everyone will get a new link in their email and you should use that link to join the meeting. To any of the attendees that are on the line, that link is not on our website, but you can watch the meeting on lanecounty.org and just watch the actual webcast that is broadcast, or you can email me and I will send you a link. Hopefully that will work for everybody.
Okay. Welcome back, everybody. This is Lane County Board of Commissioners meeting for the afternoon, December 1st. We had a brief recess to reset our cameras. We are in the middle of agenda item 13B. We have gone through public testimony at this point. And so now we are on to board discussion and action. We have several options that we can do. We can close the hearing. We can direct staff to modify the ordinance and bring it back. We could close the hearing but leave the record open. We could move forward with adoption and an order as written in a final reading. I did do some discussion in between time. There is actually time on December 15th to wrap this up, but it might push an item for our year-end business onto perhaps December 16th morning meeting. But it is possible. We'll just have a really full agenda on the 15th. So with that, I'll go to Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to ask staff that's presenting today, I just wanted to ask if you're making a recommendation on either of the two motions that are presented. The number one motion was move approval of the 5th reading, set the 6th reading for December 15th. Or number two, move to approve the 5th reading and set the 6th reading and continue the public hearing to December 15. I know you said in your opening remarks maybe to January 5. Could you clarify what your recommendation is?
Yes, certainly. I think staff would recommend to move to approve the 5th reading and set the 6th reading, closing the public hearing. And we would need that 6th reading in order to have this version of the ordinance be read twice. But I believe we would be recommending option 1.
Yeah, okay. That's what I thought. And then the other question is, when we made that motion that was amended several times before we voted on it, and I believe you covered this in your remarks, but I just wanted to ask it straight up. Did you implement those changes that the commissioners asked to be included in my amended motion?
Yes, all of the changes that I discussed from the motion, those changes have been incorporated into the ordinance that's before you today. Okay, well, Chair, I'd like to move approval of the 5th reading of ordinance 20-08 and set the 6th reading for December 15. And if there's a second, I'd like to speak to this motion.
Second.
Okay, motion approved or moved by Commissioner Sorensen, second by Commissioner Burney. We'll go to discussion. I'll call back on Commissioner Sorensen.
So, as many of you know, Lane County has a sister county in Germany, and I've taken a special interest over the years in that relationship and learned more about that. That goes back to World War II and Cleve Dum-Die and Oregon Army National Guard troops stationed in the St. Wendell area. So every once in a while I put in a reference to Germany, and today's reference is from Otto von Bismarck. He was the unifier of the nation state we now know as Germany in 1871, was the first chancellor of Germany, and he's most famous in political circles for the observation that if you like laws and sausage, you should never watch either one being made. And the reason I brought that up is because some of our commenters said we relied upon lots of public process, and some even pointed out that our chair has been very patient with all of us on our various motions and various concerns. And I just wanted to say that no piece of legislation is perfect. There are reasons to continue to sort of chip at this. I personally did like the comments of Mr. Emmons regarding the free board and also the increased need for protection of the rivers in the county. But I think this ordinance does do a lot, and it obviously is something for the board to keep working on in terms of any adjustments that need to be made to it. And but I just wanted to say I appreciate the work staff did to try to implement the various perspectives of the commissioners and get it into a form where we can adopt it later this year. Thank you.
Commissioner Posevich. We need your audio.
My apologies. Chair, before we get to my discussion of the motion, just a point of order or clarity. I don't believe I heard the motion address the status of the hearing. Is the motion to close the hearing or continue the hearing?
That's a good point. Can you clarify, Commissioner Sorensen? We will need your audio too.
It is to close the public hearing, and this motion is identical to the one in the packet that staff presented to have a record vote on this on December 15.
And I just want to clarify for the second that that is okay for you as well. Commissioner Brand. Yes, okay.
Thank you. That clarifies it for me, because I for one, spent several hours trying to find the references in the Oregon Structural Specialty Code and the Oregon Fire Code to what the exempt thresholds were for hazardous materials and a listing of those materials, and I could not find them. And I'm somebody that deals with code regularly, so I can't. Closing the public hearing for me, is a lack of opportunity, because you have somebody that used to work for the state of Oregon that now works for Wildish that couldn't find that, and myself that could not find those references. I spent last night and this morning trying to do that and part of lunch hour. I'd like to get either something from staff that could be made public so people can find those references and make comment relative to that issue. And if the public hearing is closed, that will not be available to folks. So I think we're prematurely closing the public hearing, knowing that there is a major reference that is not available to the public. If we want good public process, we have to have information easily available to the public, not buried in a reference in a definition and then go search and find it public to see whether you agree with it or not. So I don't believe we should be closing the public hearing on this. I don't believe we should be moving ahead quickly with it. I'd like to go back and address just a couple things that were said. One, was talking about how we shouldn't do just the minimum. I want to make it absolutely perfectly clear that our current code is above the minimum requirements from FEMA and the flood insurance program. We're requiring 1 foot of freeboard right now above the 100-year flood. That is 1 foot higher than the minimum. So I want to make that absolutely clear that our current code already goes beyond the minimum standards. What we're discussing now is a revised code that goes well beyond that minimum with another foot of freeboard and adopts additional language that was not even in the model code that the state presented us. The compensatory fill language is not in the model code. The critical facilities language is not in the model code, but is a recommended addition to the model code. The compensatory fill is not even in the recommended additions to the model code. It's a completely, drafted by Lane County and added in. And I think, we're fraught with issues with that. And we've discussed it before. I think the letter from Wildish discussed it. It gets really difficult when you get smaller lots. And I really take exception to the description that all these homes are $1 million homes that are probably insured, and $5,000 to $10,000 is not going to make or break people. One only has to look at the town of Blue River, which I gave you maps last time that show that the entire town is covered with floodplain, to understand that this is going to cost people with low incomes and low property values that $5,000 to $10,000. Because those properties are in the floodplain and will be required to add that extra foot of elevation above the foot we already require above the minimum. A foot above the minimum. So I would, really urge the board to slow down, get this right. We need to know what those references are for hazardous materials, so we understand it doesn't, take just placing somebody's home with some cleaning supplies to be considered a critical facility, and then you're up to 3 feet above the flood elevation instead of 2. And, that needs to be understood. I think we really have to understand that we are going so far above the minimums with this. And we're delaying for 3 years implementation when it comes to fire victims. If we have the ability to do that, we have the ability to wait another month or so to get everything correct in this. So closing the public hearing, I think, is a mistake. And I just want to remind folks that at one point you could not swim in the Willamette River in Portland. You can do that today. So claims about water quality degrading and being worse than they've ever been, I have to take a little exception to, because I spent a lot of my career fixing that problem. It was the same thing with the Potomac River in Washington, D.C. You could not swim in the Potomac River, and you can do that today. So I really, some of these broad statements, I think we need to watch out for. We are already above the minimum standards with our current codes, so we're not in danger of, if we don't move quickly, of some great hazard here. We're better off taking our time, leaving the public hearing, continuing the public hearing, and allowing folks, to find, get staff to give us a link to that code provision that has the hazardous material exemption limits. And we need to really rethink this whole compensatory fill thing a bit, because I think we are really going to cause more issues than we're going to fix.
Okay. Any other comments, discussion? I'll add a few thoughts. Oh, Commissioner Burney, go ahead. And then Commissioner Farr, I'll speak last.
Once again, Commissioner Farr outpokered me. This is a question for Rachel. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Can you respond? Do you agree that things aren't better defined as it related to the toxic materials now than they were when we asked you to do that?
I think what we've proposed to you today, the references to the building code, provide a little more clarity and continuity than what was initially in the code. And I feel that way because any structure being built in the floodplain is also going to have to comply with the Oregon Structural Specialty Code if it happens to include or contain the hazardous materials that are referenced in that code. So I envision the floodplain and the building code as working together, and that being better than it was where we had references to state statute and to EPA standards and things like that. And I do have those references in front of me, and I just want to, if I can, provide a little bit of clarity as to why they weren't included specifically in the definition. These references to the Oregon Structural Specialty Code, from what I understand, that code gets updated every 3 years or so. And so those specific references change, and that's why they were not included specifically in the definition. But I do agree and apologize that they were not at least referenced in the agenda cover memo itself.
Okay, thank you. A couple more, if I may, Chair, because honestly, I thought this was pretty put to bed, but then I was listening very carefully to what Commissioner Bozovich said, and it raised questions for me. Rachel, also, if I may, do you mind me saying, calling you Rachel as opposed to Ms. Sursloff?
No, that's fine. First name is fine.
You're rude. I'm looking at Ms. Wood's letter that you provided us in our board materials, and I'm looking at the 2 definitions of critical facilities. Do you think she makes a good point in terms of kind of locking that up, or no?
If you'd give me a moment, I will need to pull up her comments specifically.
Okay, I may be blowing it, but as I read it, it was just more specific, and it was a proposed language that a Hirschner Hunter attorney proposed, I think.
Oh, was it the Wildish comments?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Yes.
So the new language doesn't have, I believe it's more definitive because it doesn't have the language includes but not limited to when defining critical facilities. So now it is in the ordinance before you, it's a list explicitly of facilities that would be considered critical.
Okay, because that was the main difference I saw.
Yes.
And my last question isn't a question, it's a statement, because 6 readings to me is not pushing something through. And you also accommodated the whole no rise requirement as opposed to being more prescriptive than that.
Sorry, can you repeat your question?
I'm sorry. Was someone going to? Oh, I just recall, and forgive me if I'm doing this incorrectly, that in our conversation during the 4th reading, there was an issue about being a bit too prescriptive as it related to storage, and discussing how any activity would require a no rise analysis. And I thought we had ended on only that no rise analysis would be required. Am I making sense?
Yes. If you're asking staff, how
Yes.
I heard the motion was that there should be an option to provide a no rise analysis from an engineer in lieu of meeting the compensatory storage for fill requirements. So
Correct.
Those standards for compensatory storage weren't removed from the proposed ordinance, but there was an option added where instead of meeting the criteria for compensatory storage, you could submit a no rise analysis instead of that.
Thank you. You've answered my question. So now I feel comfortable moving forward. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Buck. I was pleased to hear so much of the testimony revolved around people who fish the river or who fly fish the river. People seem to wear that as a badge of honor, which I'm glad they do, because I wear that same badge. I fish the Mackenzie River, I fish the Willamette. My family farm was on the Trask River in Tillamook. I have a Mackenzie drift boat, which I bought a little over a quarter of a century ago, but it was old when I bought it. So my boat's been on the river a lot more than most people have actually gazed at the river, I'm sure. That being said, I moved here about 47 years ago to the Willamette Valley. I consider myself a newcomer still, and so I'm still learning the ways of how the Willamette Valley operates in terms of both social and business interaction. So I'll move along to what my comments are. And Rachel, I'm going to have a question for you, a couple of questions regarding compensatory fill after this next statement. The Board of County Commissioners, this board continually talks strongly about the cost of housing. We continually say that we want to do whatever we can to prevent increases in the cost of housing. And the estimate that was given on elevation rise was at $5,000 to $10,000, and Mr. Emmons said that a builder or a homeowner, the buyer of the house, should be able to absorb that particular cost and build in their home. That being said, the number of homes that we're talking about downstream from Blue River that potentially are going to be constructed in the areas that would require either 1 foot or a 2 foot elevation rise, it's a relatively small number of houses. And other than Commissioner Bozovich's comments regarding Blue River and the many lower income people who will be replacing homes in Blue River and alongside the Mackenzie River in the Holiday Farm Fire area, other than that, the houses are going to be pretty high cost houses because these are desirable places for people to live with views, with the large pieces of property or whatever it may be. So Mr. Emmons may be right. Maybe some of those people can afford to absorb $5,000 or $10,000 for the cost of their new home. Now, and that being the case, I'm probably willing to move forward with the discussion that we have at this point in time regarding how it affects housing. If we added $5,000 to the cost of every dwelling that we're going to be either building, remodeling, or replacing in Lane County, it would be absolutely disabling to our efforts to house people in Lane County, not just in the future when the flood of climate change refugees show up, as they are beginning to show up, and we've had a number of comments regarding climate change already today. But today, when kids are graduating from high school and require a place to live, the cost of housing is one of the most critical things that we live with in Lane County. Commissioner Burney mentioned it a couple of times this morning in earlier deliberation on a completely different issue. But that being said, the number of houses downstream from Blue River, downstream from Holiday Farm, is probably negligible. And those houses could be built elsewhere potentially, or the cost absorbed. Now, the point that I want to make, however, is regarding compensatory fill. And I think that we've not spoken very much about it, other than, as Commissioner Burney mentioned, we talked about a no-rise analysis in lieu of compensatory fill. But I'm going to the letter that we received from Kelly Wood, Rachel. And Kelly raises 5 points in that letter surrounding compensatory fill. And now I'm not going to ask you specifically about them because I think it would take a long time to discuss each one of these 5 points, but each one of the 5 points seems to have validity that really requires discussion before we actually add something that really isn't in the model code, that really is, and maybe you can answer this, Rachel, is it peculiar to Lane County? Does anybody else have this, or is it recommended by model codes? Did we come up with this? Did we actually come up with a compensatory storage?
Yes, so this was drafted by staff. It did not come out of any model code. Off the top of my head, I believe the city of Portland has standards for compensatory storage. And that's the only one I can think of in the state at the moment that has that standard. The state Department of Land Conservation and Development also had some draft research and some draft language for compensatory storage for fill that I reviewed and utilized to draft this language, because they were working or are working on refining that language for maybe future use in a model ordinance. I don't think there's any guarantee that that will happen, but it was something that the state was exploring, but it didn't make it into that model code.
And thank you for that, Rachel, because you've really answered my question. We're pioneering in this, in the compensatory storage. It's something that's not really been done. Portland's not much like us. You know, Lane County and the city of Portland have very, very different waterfronts. They have very little floodplain in the Portland area that's not already been extensively developed and built up. Lane County is very different. We have a lot of such floodplain and adjacent areas. So my suggestion then, in order for us to more cleanly move forward, because compensatory storage is an issue, we invented it more or less. We invented this language. It's not recommended by a model code. It's something that we came up with here in Lane County, looking a little bit at Portland and looking maybe at LCDC, I think is what you suggested, but possible future model codes. But it really is something that we're writing our own right now. So my recommendation as we move forward is that let's just drop this section from this ordinance. Let's drop compensatory storage and have a further discussion on that when we can spend more time specifically on it. And maybe when we are closer to having a model code surrounding compensatory storage. So I guess at this point, I would like to make an amendment to the motion made by Commissioner Sorensen that we move forward with the motion as stated, with the addition of deleting the compensatory storage section from the ordinance. That's my motion.
Second.
Okay. I was first going to ask if that was considered friendly, but we'll just move forward with the first and a second. So we have a motion on the table just for removing the compensatory section in its entirety. And I don't, and the second, I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, I'd like to speak to that now that we've got the second. Pardon my interruption of your speech.
Okay. So we have a second on that. The motion currently is just that, not the main motion.
That's correct, just to remove compensatory storage. I would love it to be a friendly motion because it would allow the balance of the ordinance to move forward in a more streamlined fashion, potentially closer to passage of the ordinance. I think that this one is going to, if it does pass with this provision in it, it's going to be pretty controversial, not only in terms of how I particularly feel about it and other people who are going to be affected may feel about it, but because it's something that we are writing a novel section to an ordinance. We're not copying anybody else on this. I mean, we're kind of vaguely looking at Portland. We're writing our own. Let's take more time on this part of it.
Other discussion on Commissioner Farr's motion. Commissioner Sorensen.
As I understand it, your motion is to amend mine. And as I understand it, you want to change the ordinance, and yet the purpose of my motion was to have us vote on the 15th as included in the staff memorandum and recommendation of staff. So I guess it's a legal question of if we were to adopt this motion, could we, with the way the motion's been written, could we in fact adopt the ordinance on December 15th?
Chair Buck, Andy Clark here. I can speak to that if you'd like.
Please.
Yes. The motions are running a little bit parallel, and it would be good to reduce them down to one if we can. Normally, when we have a motion on the table, it's voted on before another motion's made, unless the motion maker wants to add as a friendly amendment, for example, what Commissioner Farr just mentioned. That being said, getting to the question of whether we would be able to adopt on the next reading, if we simply deleted language out of what's in the draft code, the answer is yes, as long as that's clear. That's what's happening today. We can remove language but not add language, if that's clear.
And I disagree. And it's common to amend motions and make a change in the motion if it passes. It either becomes a friendly or passes a vote. It's common. We've done it regularly. And Commissioner Swanson one time seconded a motion of mine, you may recall, that changed the motion completely.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that we should have a up or down vote on this. And I'll just say by way of advocacy that I think that my view is that we have heard extensive commentary from the public on all aspects of this ordinance. There will be a need to look at this ordinance after adoption to see if there are any technical flaws in the ordinance. I don't think it's necessary for every ordinance to be perfect. They can always be amended. With regard to the policy issues of housing, I think the overall structure of this has, meaning the various drafts we've had and the various public hearings we've had, have given the advocates for both low-income housing as well as more middle class and even upper income housing the opportunity to present their views. And we don't really have much in the way of objections to this ordinance as affecting the housing stock of Lane County or the affordability of housing. And so I think that argument that somehow this is going to intrude on our housing goals, it really isn't there. And then finally, I'll just say that we are doing our best to balance the competing interests here. And I think this legislation as a whole does do that and does advance some of the health and safety issues, namely the protection of people and property adjacent to rivers and downstream from other places on rivers. And that's why I urge a no vote on this amendment. And I urge a yes vote on the big motion. Thank you.
We'll go to Commissioner Bozovich next, and then I can come back to Commissioner Farr. This is just for this amendment. And Commissioner.
Yeah, thank you. Just to remind folks that technically friendly amendments are an exception to the rule, that once a motion's been made and seconded, it's the body's motion, it's no longer the maker's. And you technically should never make friendly amendments. So just want to make that clear. The only way to fix a motion really is by amendment. I want to remind folks that we have an exception written in there to delay for 3 years the 1 year, the extra foot of fill for victims of the Holiday Farm fire. The thing it does not exempt the victims from is compensatory storage. So, you know, if we don't remove this section, we are going to force everyone that's reconstructing from the Holiday Farm fire in the floodplain, which I have shown you by maps is a significant number of the victims, to have to do compensatory fill. And quite often on teensy-tiny lots in places like the town of Blue River. So I just want to make sure that's clear. Second, we actually had testimony from one of the board members of Land Watch Lane County today saying that he felt we shouldn't even be doing that exemption of the extra foot of elevation for fire victims, which means he's, you know, that particular organization has been known for appealing all of our land use decisions for the most part in Lane County, which means they may appeal our ordinance relative to that exemption. And contrary to Commissioner Sorensen's desire to not want to wait till after to fix things, the way things get fixed after a lot of times is by appeals. And this ordinance includes a savings and severability clause. So, you know, we need to fix the compensatory fill thing for the fire victims. How do we do that? We either have to go back and try and include it in the delay of the application of the code for those folks, or we need to pull it from the code altogether. And this motion does that. If we, and even then, we need to be careful and make sure we're writing this well so somebody can't appeal it and remove something that was intended to help the fire victims and make them subject to the code all over again. So they're having to do everything anyway. So I support the amendment. You know, I would support, you know, going back to the drawing board and trying to get the code right to start with. But if we don't approve this amendment, everyone that's reconstructing from the Holiday Farm fire in the floodplain will have to do compensatory fill or go through paying for an engineering study to show no rise. And then hoping that that doesn't get appealed and end up in you know, in the, you know, all the way up to the Court of Appeals and spending more than the 3 years. You know, all I can see is we're setting a lot of people up if we move forward with this that were fire victims for possible appeals and delays in their reconstruction. And the compensatory fill is just part of it. Don't get me started on the higher ground when possible phrase and how easily appealable that is. So, you know, we need to have this code right before we pass it, not pass it and then hope it's right. I support the amendment.
I'll go to Commissioner Farr and then Commissioner Berney.
Thank you, Chair Buck. And I just want to point out that my motion is just about compensatory fill, and Commissioner Sorensen mentioned the cost of housing. That's not a part of my motion. What I stated in my when I spoke about my motion is that I'm prepared to go ahead with the other provisions of this ordinance. I'm prepared to, even with the language regarding hazardous material, I'm prepared to go ahead with that. But I believe that compensatory fill is something that's going to be a hazard for us for a lot of years to come if we don't do something about it now. And the only thing we can do about it right now is to remove it from the language of the ordinance. Fairly simple fix. Doesn't take into account anything else. It doesn't really there are no ramifications with any other part of the ordinance.
Commissioner Berney.
Well, given the nature of this discussion, I want to start by saying I'm always willing to be corrected. But there have been so many things stated and referenced to. I'd like to just refer to a couple of them. One is, I don't have a clue how much houses on the river or that would be subject to this are worth. I don't know if they're worth 200,000. I don't know if they're worth 2 million, but I do know that Commissioner Bozovich and I are still pursuing some mechanism to assist with specific costs in rebuilding, especially for those that are low income or have income challenges. So I would, and this is speculation on my part, nothing is locked in, but I would hope that for those people who don't fall into the, oh, they're $1 million homes, but that this would be some sort of adversity, we could, not the Board of Commissioners, but separately could find mechanisms to assist with that. I was prepared to agree with Commissioner Farr, but that's why I asked Rachel the question, because it concerned me. As long as the no rise analysis in lieu of any of these compensatory storage requirements is in place, which was initially what I believe the Wildish Company was requesting, and which made complete sense to me. As long as that's in there, I'm comfortable with Commissioner Sorensen's motion. Thank you.
Okay. it sounds like we are at a point where we can vote on the amendment by Commissioner Farr. So at this point, I will.
Chair,
call
could
for-
I
Yes.
interrupt for a moment? I just wanted to get some clarity on the motion to remove the compensatory storage for fill provision. So right now that includes the option to submit a no rise instead of meeting the compensatory storage standards. And the motion as is would remove that entire section. But from what Commissioner Burney just said, is the intent to keep the provision for a no rise for fill? Is the intent of the board to keep that standard in the code? To what the effect of that would be is any fill placed in the floodplain would have to provide a no rise analysis to be allowed to be in the floodplain.
Commissioner Farr, I think that one might be directed at you as the maker of the motion.
I have lost audio.
Can you hear, did you hear Rachel? Can you hear me?
Chair Buck, I can hear you, but Rachel was digitizing is the only way I could describe it. So, but my point, the point I'll make on that is that this would remove the need for a no rise analysis.
Rachel, I don't know if that gets to your question. I mean, basically, if I'm summarizing this properly, the amendment would remove both the in lieu and the compensatory storage requirement in its entirety.
That's how I'm understanding it, and I just want to make sure that that's the intent.
Yep. Is that the intent?
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but if there is no compensatory storage requirement, there's no reason to have any language surrounding a no rise analysis to offset compensatory storage. So if there's no compensatory storage, you don't need the no rise consideration. And I think once again, this would simplify this ordinance. It would move this ordinance forward, and we could address the compensatory storage in a far more comprehensive manner subsequent to the passage of the rest of the ordinance. And I'm looking at you, Commissioner Burney, that we could work on compensatory storage as a separate issue and satisfy really all parties, including the replacement housing that's taking place up the Mackenzie.
Okay, that clarifies it for Rachel, I believe. Commissioner Burney.
I don't know who I'm asking this to, but were that the case, were the amendment to the motion approved, would that allow us to then resolve this matter at our December 15th meeting?
I believe it would. It would just mean that the main motion that we have on the table would not include that section that's that the motion asks for removal of.
Thank you.
Any
Chair,
other? Yes.
This is Amber Bell, Planning Director. I thought I might add that, ultimately removing this provision in the code is a policy direction for the board to make. If that is the direction the board would take, we'd be happy to add evaluation of that provision as part of our long range work plan in the future and return to the board with this question, with this provision.
Mr. Bozovich.
So I just was flipping down through the code, and I just want to clarify, I guess, what the motion basically is asking to do is to remove all of section 5A small Roman numeral 10 or X from the code, which is the section on compensatory storage for fill. which includes the no rise in lieu of no rise in that section. And that, as to move to a definitive vote on December 15th, we can approve this 5th reading less that section 5AX and be able to vote on the 15th to answer some of Commissioner Sorensen's question. If basically that's what the reading is now, is to just pull that entire section out of the code if this amendment's approved.
Okay, Commissioner Burney.
The only way I know how to ask another commissioner a question is to be recognized. Commissioner Sorensen, you're the original maker of the motion. I'd like to know your perspective on deleting this item, revisiting it later, but approving the rest of this as is.
Commissioner Sorensen, we'll need your audio.
Oh, sorry about that. I thought I clarified that when I asked Ms. Surslev if she listened to the board meeting where we had various amendments to our big motion to present this, and if all of the items that were brought to her attention by our heavily amended main motion a few weeks ago, I thought I made it clear by asking her if that had been implemented, and her response was yes. I also asked her if this ordinance was ready for adoption, and she said yes. So to me, there will be people on various sides of this issue who will not like things in this ordinance, and I guess I've been through a number of ordinances over the last 24 years, and I'm comfortable with the fact that people will not always like what we do, but I also think that there's a overriding policy objective that we're trying to achieve here, and that we should take that opportunity after we've given the kind of public scrutiny to this ordinance over the various hearings and drafts that we've had. So, that's just my perspective.
All right, any further discussion on the amendment? I don't see any, so I will call for the vote on the amendment. This is to remove the compensatory storage section from the current draft in front of us. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay.
Nay.
All right, motion does not pass from 3 to 2 or 2 to 3. So we will move back to the main motion.
Chair, you should probably clarify that the no votes were.
Oh, I will do that. In the nay are Commissioner Bozovich and Commissioner Park.
No, they were in the affirmative.
You're right. Okay. You're right. Let me get this right because it's important. So there were 2 yeas, 3 nays. Nay is Commissioner Burney, Commissioner Sorensen, and myself. All right, let's go back to the main motion that we have in front of us, which was made by Commissioner Sorensen. And this one is to move and approve the 5th reading of the ordinance to 20-08, to close the public hearing and to set the 6th reading for December 15th. Any final discussion on this motion? Commissioner Bozovich.
I want to make it absolutely clear that this motion will require fire victims rebuilding in the floodplain to do compensatory fill.
Any other discussion? Actually, I have a question on that particular item for Ms. Surslev. So for the folks First, does everybody have to have this fill requirement? I'm thinking no, but I want to know from staff what this means, and I want to know if everybody has to submit something on this issue when they're going through permits to rebuild.
So the answer to your first question is no. Not everyone would have to do compensatory storage for fill. They would only do that if they were proposing to elevate a structure on fill or place any amount of fill in the floodplain. Their other option is to elevate on a stem wall, which is the most common type of construction for elevating structures in the floodplain. Can you repeat your second question just to make sure I answer it?
The second question was, when people go to issue permits for rebuilding, will people need to submit something on this issue every single time, or only in the situations in which you just described?
Only in the situation that I just described. So only if they're proposing to place fill. If they're proposing to elevate on stem wall, they would need a different type of floodplain development permit that wouldn't require the compensatory storage.
And if I understand the stem wall issue, that is if they have any wall left. A lot of these folks won't have any structure left. It will have to be, it's not structurally sound.
Yeah. So I'm talking more in if they have a completely vacant site because their home was completely destroyed and they were proposing a brand new dwelling. If they're proposing that in the floodplain, the standards require that structure to be elevated. And the most common construction type for elevating a new structure in the floodplain is on a stem wall. So essentially they're building the first finished floor of the structure, they're building that up, and they're going to have a crawl space underneath that first finished floor.
So this would be in a situation where, for a fire victim, let's say they're rebuilding on, let's just say their same site that they were, if they had to dig down and redo fill, this would come into play? Or is it only if they're then elevating up? Because we do have in this draft a 3-year delay for the freeboard.
Right. So the 3-year delay is for the additional freeboard requirement in this ordinance. So that's the additional foot that we're proposing. So they would still have to elevate the 1 foot above base flood elevation, which is the standard that's in the current code right now.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. Any other discussion on this item before we vote? Commissioner Bozovich.
I just want to clarify that a stem wall can be considered fill. It depends on how the building's designed. It has to be designed to flow through enough and drain to not be considered fill. And so be careful about that definition of fill. The floodplain sees buildings as fill unless they allow water in and they can store the water and it can flow back out. So, take care, fill of dirt or fill of a foundation is still fill.
Any other discussion on this? I don't see any. So I'll just say that from what I understand from the discussion just made regarding fire victim issues is there is currently in the code and has been for some time the 1 foot elevation requirement. We're not adding or changing that. We are stating that in 3 years the additional freeboard will come into play. Do I have that correct, Rachel?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. At this point, if there's no more discussion, we'll call for the vote. All those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Okay. Commissioner Farr, I'm not sure if I know you're an aye or a nay.
I voted yes on this motion.
Okay, thank you. I think we're just having some technical audio issues. So the motion passes 4-1 with Commissioner Bozievich and a nay. Thank you, everybody. We'll see this item come back up on the 15th. At this point, we'll continue moving through our agenda. We are on item 14A, Commissioner's Business and Announcements. Any announcements? Oh, I don't see any. Oh, Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Buck. And I touched on this announcement earlier in my discussion after public comment, and that is regarding the Poverty and Homelessness Board has a new chair, which is Chris McAllister, replaces Pat Walsh, who's been the chair since the inception of the Poverty and Homelessness Board. Poverty and Homelessness Board is a multi-jurisdictional board. That is to say, there are members from different voting jurisdictions who are on the board, as well as a number of other mandatory positions that are on that board. It is a statutory board. It is a required board, and Chris McAllister has been on the board since its inception also. He'll serve as a great new chair of that board. The other committee that I mentioned is one that doesn't get a great deal of discussion, but it's one that's had a great deal of impact, and that is it's currently called the Shelter Stakeholder Committee. It's a subcommittee of the Poverty and Homelessness Board. Once again, it's multi-jurisdictional, not intergovernmental. So, for instance, the mayor of Eugene is on the committee, as well as other department heads. Dan Bryant is on the committee, Cheryl Balthrop's on the committee, Jacob Fox is on the committee, a member of from St. Vincent de Paul, Tim Black is on the committee, and a number of other names of people who have been influential in defining the need for shelter in Lane County. That committee now has a new chair. It's important to know that Kirsten London is now the chair of that committee. You'll hear more from that committee as we move forward with shelter requirements, shelter policy recommendations. Thank you.
Very good. Any other announcements? Commissioner Sorensen.
I'm sorry for the delay there. I just wanted to announce that the transition involving Commissioner-elect Trieger and myself is ongoing and very happily so. I have cleaned out virtually all of the things out of my office, maybe more accurately stated, the South Eugene Commissioner office at the present time, and that Commissioner-elect Trieger has been formally certified as the winner of the election, and that she has been onboarded through the excellent staff work of Ms. Jones and Mr. Mokrahysky and many other people involved. And I just want to, again, welcome her to the new assignment and to make things as positive as possible for her in this transition in her life. And I know all of us at one point or another have made this transition, and it can be daunting. And I just wanted to say how pleased I am that she's working so hard during this transition to be up to speed, and that she's getting these briefings and will be hitting the ground running after she formally assumes office on January 4th. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other announcements? All right, I don't see any, so we'll move to future board assignment requests. Now with our meeting today, we are now down to 15 assignments that we still are working on, but that's an improvement. I know staff is not looking for more assignments, but If there are any more assignments from commissioners, let me know, Commissioner Sorensen.
In our public comment today, we heard Ms. Salicki, who has a great deal of experience working with homeless people and people that are in need of social services. And she made the suggestion that we open up the fairgrounds for parking lots specifically for purposes of having the singular units, often called conestogas, that can shelter people better than a tent. And I thought that that was an excellent suggestion and one that's worth our review. I'm open as to whether it's a staff report or it's a work session, but I do think we should follow that up with some kind of response. So I guess I'll just throw it out as a staff report, and depending on the what the staff report says, a work session or implementation, or forget the idea. But I just wanted to pose that as something that the board might request.
I would support a staff report, but not necessarily a whole work session on it.
Well, that's why I kind of took your cue from the number of work sessions that the agenda team is dealing with. If staff, all sides, fairgrounds, health and human services, whatever, they think it's a great idea, we'll move forward. If they tell us it's not, then we'll consider that recommendation as well.
Is there a third commissioner who's interested? Okay, Commissioner Burney, thumbs up. Okay, so we have a staff report on that assignment. Any other future board assignment requests? All right, I don't see any, so we'll go to review of assignments.
So I have that request, which is a staff report on the use of the Lane Event Center. We are using the Lane Event Center for Egan Warming Center. So the question is, using the parking, the question is, you want to report on using the parking lot at the Lane Event Center for additional individual units? And do we have information on the number of units, who would operate it, or do you just want us to reach out to Heather Salecki and inquire on that?
She suggested the Fair Board be involved in that.
Right. I mean, I think that we certainly, I mean, the board can certainly, I think what you're asking initially is a human services question, right? And it's also needs to be tied with public health recommendations around, so if we're going to have people, it's even if they're staying in or in individual units, we still need to have protocols and services connected to those individuals. So I think the initial conversation probably does need to include Lane Event Center staff, but primarily I think it should include human services staff to really determine, okay, what all would be required to make this happen. So we can just do, I mean, if you wanted, but that, sorry, I just want to get clarity on, you asked for a report, not a work session. If we, are you just asking for a written report in response, or do you want us to do a presentation to the board with various staff? Just trying to get some clarity on what you'd like to see.
Commissioner Sorensen?
Thanks. I guess, thank you for those questions. And I think this is just my idea, but I think in light of the chair's reminder that there's a lot of other things that are pending before the agenda team, I guess I would frame it this way. This is an assignment to the county administrator to pull together a report with recommendations, including the input from the Fair Board, input from the Health and Human Services people that deal with COVID, and the Health and Human Services people that deal with homeless people, pull together a report. Is it a good idea or not to put Conestogas at the fairgrounds? Who would pay for it? How much it might cost? Where the money would come from? If it's a good idea in light of all the other things we're doing. And if the board gets this report and it's emailed to the board and the board wants to take further action, such as scheduling for discussion, such as, formally saying that we're not going to do it, or scheduling a work session if it looks like a good idea. In my conversations with social services people, I've pointed out that COVID has brought us money, but that money is really aimed in large part at dealing with the disease. And yes, there are economic development funds. Yes, there are funds that we've used to buy the property on River Avenue. There are additional funds, but the budget impact of all of this is real, and that funding or ideas to expend money often have to come with ideas of how to acquire money. And that's the reason I'm framing it in terms of a report. I think the problem is really serious of people being out in this really tough weather. And in my tours around the community, looking at these Conestogas that are at churches and at vacant areas, they provide a bit more humane shelter than a tent on the ground. They can be locked. The people that live there, they consider it better than what they had before. So, thank you. Was that clear about what my idea was?
Yep, I think I got it.
Commissioner Bozovich?
Thank you. In the interest of saving staff time, we are currently trying to site 100 pallet shelters around our community. And we are currently trying to expand EGAN services. We all know that any expansion of these services usually takes somebody to staff, et cetera. By the time we write contracts and get something set up on the fairgrounds, winter is going to probably be over at this point. I hate to kind of, be the bearer of bad news there. And at the same time, we're starting to see the rollout of vaccines. So I'm kind of wondering, are we asking staff to write a report that's going to take them several weeks to write probably? It's going to be about something that's going to take a month or two to implement. Meanwhile, we're trying to get these 100 shelters set up and have other programs going that we ought to be concentrating on. But we're going to prepare a report that's basically going to come in too late, too little, and not really have any impact, because we're going to really want to start thinking about when's it time to start reusing the fairgrounds as the way they were supposed to be, because folks are getting vaccinated and we can start having large gatherings again. I kind of think that this request for a report is not helpful for staff. We've loaded them up with so much work with the pandemic, and now we're asking them to look into something that I think is, tilting at windmills.
Commissioner Farr?
Thank you. And Steve, you'll know, and you know this, that Sarai Johnson's done a lot of work on this. The Human Services Commission and other bodies have been doing a lot of work on this for a lot of years. Sometimes when you look at it from the outside, when you've not really been watching what's been going on, then it's really easy to suggest something that's already been discussed at length. So, I'm all for looking for every single square foot of open space that we can find on Lane County property. I've asked for that over and over again in places like the Armory, and quite often, Mr. Mokraski, you've been able to find the space. We look at space surrounding behavioral health, space in other parking lots. You've done a good job of finding the space. So I think this is not new information. It's information that you've given to us a number of times, but I'm reluctant to suggest that staff divert their attention from ongoing and forward-moving efforts to something that is just more or less a whim of a city council, of a county commissioner. You know, we've been working on this for a lot of years, and we've already devoted a great deal of county space to it. The report on the fairgrounds has been the same report, I believe, that you've given to us on an ongoing basis regarding health and congregate shelter.
Commissioner Berney?
I just wanted to say that ever since the first day I came on the Board of Commissioners, I'm so tired of Commissioner Farr incessantly asking this question: where are we going to find more places? I'm not tired of it. I'm being silly. It's the question that's being asked. So, you know, I gave a head nod to this because I was moved by Ms. Saliki, by Heather's, not you, Heather, by Heather's input this morning. The need is tantamount. It really is. We all know that. But listening to Commissioner Bozovich and Commissioner Farr, the other thing Heather said this morning, Heather Saliki, was we need it now. We need it now. Well, that's not even what we're talking about. We're talking about a study that won't have an impact this winter. And for that reason, given, you know, I would request Steve respond to this because I don't know, but the sense I get is that our staff is so overloaded and overworked that it's kind of phenomenal. So if we vote again, I'm going to or head nods again, I'm going to rescind my head nod if it's not actionable this winter to help people now. Thank you.
Commissioner Sorensen?
I just wanted to clarify that I didn't ask for a study. I didn't ask for a consultant. I don't want a big report. I used the phrase a report. And as far as I'm concerned, the county administrator can discharge this duty by sending us an email if he labels it report. This is intended to further a humanitarian request from a knowledgeable person in our community. It's not my request at all. This is a follow-up to public comment, and I don't dismiss that we are doing a great deal of other things, and those things are very important. I'm simply making a request that the administrator make this report to us.
I'm going to say I was also thinking it would be just an internal assessment by the administrator, not a big report. Just, hey, is this possible? If it is, great. How would we do it? If it's not possible, the reasons why, and we move forward. So for clarification for our administrator, is that something we still want to?
Yeah.
You're good. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. If there aren't any other future board assignment requests, I am going to do one brief other business before we go into executive session requested from staff. So we are interviewing for new planning commissioner candidates, and we have been asked if the board would designate a subcommittee to interview these folks. We have 2 vacant seats on this particular board. They would like to fill before the next planning commission meeting to be scheduled, but likely to be in December or the early part of 2021. The subcommittee consisted of 2 board commissioners in the past. Are there any commissioners that would be willing to interview and be on this subcommittee so we can get 2 more planners on staff? Commissioner Bozovich is one. Is there another? Anybody?
Traditionally, it's been the 2 rural commissioners that do the interview process in the past.
Oh.
I've done that with
You're nominating.
Commissioner Stewart over the last several years.
Okay.
Because the planning commission generally deals with rural unincorporated areas, not the incorporated cities. That's been the tradition. Doesn't have to stay there, but just so you know.
If there are no other volunteers, I will do that. My calendar's a little tight, but I'll.
Sorry, Heather.
Okay. So there we have it. Commissioner Bozovich and myself will be on the subcommittee. And at this point, I'm going to move us into executive session. The Board of County Commissioners will meet in executive session to consult with counsel concerning the legal rights and duties of a public body with regard to current litigation or litigation likely to be filed. The executive session is held pursuant to ORS 192.660 subsection 2 subsection H, which allows the Board of Commissioners to meet in executive session for the purposes listed. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decision may be made in executive session. We reserve the right to come back out into public session should the need arise. I do not see a need at this point, but we do reserve that. With that, we are in recess with our regular Board of Commissioners meeting until tomorrow at 9 a.m. and we will move into executive session, and we'll see you there in 5 minutes. There's a separate link.